Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, January 22nd, so we are on the way out, as it were, of January. We have this theme event still going on, but otherwise I think I've pretty much done some extra work here to kind of catch up. Notably, I have really just at a point where I broke stride and I lost momentum, and I'm not going back to working on the Smart On Air sign. Not to say that I'm swearing off ever going back to it, but at the moment I just don't have the momentum to go back on it, and that's certainly stupid because I really do need the finished product and try and sell it and not just be, I mean, I can't use any other word than a loser that just gives up before you even start. A quitter, I guess, might be a more appropriate description. But yeah, I've broken stride and I'm just not really feeling it. And in not really feeling like getting back to programming, I'm instead just watching Farscape on Amazon Prime Freemium, or just playing on my phone in general, and so I'm just losing time in which I could be a little bit more productive. So in the meantime, I figured I'd just go back to making some footage, and so I played all the solo modes, and so there isn't a single solo mode here left for me to do now, and so I'm totally caught up. Now, for the end of the month, I could come in here and just defeat these with my Zodiac Tri-Brigade, which would take about 5 minutes. And then this would be completed completely instead of cleared. And the same situation is there with the first chapter of this story. Just all Zodiac Tri-Brigade victories, I believe, that are needed. So yeah, I'm just saving those for the daily quests when you have solo modes to do. On top of that, I actually played some ranked yesterday, or the day before, over the weekend, too. So I am up to Platinum, but knowing that we still have this Theme Chronicle event, it's almost zero chance that we would get to Diamond. It is literally just another month. And I can't play my Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck in this Theme Chronicle because there's a ban on almost every single extra card, and so a Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck just would not really work without being able to summon some of the extra cards. So all the focus for the rest of the month is pretty much just going to be around this Theme Chronicle, just getting enough medals to at least unlock this, ideally unlock this, to really ideally going all the way to the end. And so we'll try this deck, since we haven't tried this Lunar deck before today. After catching up with the solo mode over the weekend, I still wasn't really feeling it, and so I'm feeling like I want to go back to programming. So I started to play a game called Rethink, and make footage for that. Now Rethink is a first-person 3D laser light puzzle game that feels like it was Steam greenlit in 2017, being inspired by games like Portal, although notably it doesn't really have a main protagonist or a GLaDOS antagonist character. It really is actually fairly lackluster in sound effects at all. Its music is fine. It's pretty good music. But it definitely is asset flipping quite a lot from the Unity asset store. But I really couldn't describe it as a low effort asset flip because some effort obviously had to be put into making the laser puzzles, because they are complicated enough that this isn't just somebody doing the bare minimum. That being said, there's some issues, certainly outside and inside, in the Rethink series, in that this creator seemingly made a game called Rethink, then maybe took some feedback or changed how it played a little bit and made a game called Rethink Evolved, but then he made a game called Rethink 2 as a sequel to the original Rethink. Then he made a Rethink Evolved 2. So there's about 8 games in the Rethink/Rethink Evolved series, and none of it ever got bundled years later. None of it really gets explained well. You probably can buy it on Steam as a bundle in a weird way. Steam bundles things, but not in a proper bundle, as in they take down all the previous versions of Rethink and sell a new combined game called the Rethink Collection. There's probably, with at least 4 games, possibly 5 or more, too many puzzles to bundle in total, because then you might have like a 60-hour game that's just too long. But at the very least, the proper thing to do would have been to, once you release Rethink Evolve, take down the original Rethink and only sell Rethink Evolved and give away the original version for free, and probably bump up the price a little bit while you're at it. But nope, it doesn't do that. So there is this slight iteration here where it feels like that the creator is flooding Steam with interesting. This is an interesting ability. What can we special summon here, I guess is the question. Probably not too much. Let's see how this goes. So now on the outside, as far as Rethink, having kind of started playing the game and playing for 2 or 3 hours yesterday, last night, draining my brain, there is that outside problem, and then internally there are just some inside problems, I would say, too, in that for a 2017 game, it is see what happens if we do this. For a 2017 game, it's just not quite as polished it doesn't look anywhere as good as a Steam Direct game would look by today's standards, and it suffers heavily by comparison to something like the Talos Principle, the Talos Principle 2, The Witness, and it frankly suffers quite a bit even in direct comparisons to Portal 1 and Portal 2, which those games almost certainly were out before Rethink happened. And you can only lean so much on saying nowadays in 2024 that the game was maybe made by just one person. The biggest problem I've run into is that somewhere around the 22nd puzzle, I started solving a lot of these laser puzzles with extra components and just extra pieces. Now, around puzzle 29, there is some recursiveness leaning into that thought of rethinking, where you actually, at least I actually had to go back and resolve a previous puzzle to then solve puzzle 29, and so maybe that's what it's trying to lean on, but then that's only happened once, and I've solved puzzles with extra pieces 4 or 5 times. You don't really get an achievement for solving puzzles with extra pieces or any kind of reward. It does feel like, if you're going to lean into the name Rethink, solving a puzzle one way and getting like bronze, solving it 2 different ways would get you a silver, and 3 different ways would get you a gold, would be a way to stretch out your puzzles and be a little bit more creative. But since there's nothing like that, it does just feel like the puzzles weren't very play tested, which does make me think that maybe Rethink Evolved redoes some of the puzzles and maybe puts an occasional tree or other object in the way of some of the laser light beams, so you can't solve it the unintended way the first time you play the game. It's fine that there could be a secret second way to solve a puzzle, but it should be way more complicated. And a lot of the times when I solve puzzles, it feels like I am just brute forcing it, or I'm just doing the setup part, and then I'll just place one piece down, and that'll be it. Almost always, laser puzzles have been made traditionally from a top-down perspective with minimal graphics, and I mean, you basically could do a laser puzzle with just pen and paper. So being from a first-person perspective, that creates a lot of weirdness. Undoubtedly, what I would have wanted to experiment if I was making Rethink, I would have wanted to put a secondary camera looking downward, and I would have wanted to have TVs on the walls. And frankly, there's nothing on the walls. They're boring in their repetitiveness, just like pure clean white on most walls. But I would have put some monitors on the walls, TVs on the walls, and then presented it from a top-down view, or made TVs with little diagrams of what's happening, so you could see the whole picture instead of really only being able to see things from your one perspective. I also would experiment with, I don't know if this would have been the right move, but I would have experimented with walking in front of lasers, stopping the lasers from going forward. That way it slows down the player a little bit and makes them have to stand in specific spots outside of the not blocking any of the lasers to see if the puzzle will really work or not. The other way you could do that is you could have like a button that has a timer on it to turn on the lasers, and so you only turn them on when you're actually ready to use them. I don't think I need to activate this effect. But yeah, I definitely feel like there could be a lot more puzzles, and I might still be very much in the early stages of Rethink, but I think some experiments, some rethoughts, rethinks definitely could come into play. So this is going to add a field spell. Probably a smart move. I don't want to discard anything. $2,000 or an 1850. Guess I'm gonna go with this one. So now we wanna see like what's the biggest thing we can pendulum summon. How many more cards we can draw. The story is extremely minimal in Rethink. There's just some text that pops at the beginning and it disappeared before I even read all of it. It implied that you were a prisoner in a very fancy, clean looking prison and that you were being tested for possible release doing these laser puzzles, which honestly doesn't make that much sense. I could see doing a little bit of puzzles just to see if somebody would stick to things and follow instructions, and if they aren't just a stark raving lunatic, but to have to do a long list of puzzles feels more like you're training a computer program or an AI or just doing grunt work. Maybe they're testing your frustration level. I would have loved to see some posters or graffiti on the walls of the building if it was supposed to be a prison. And frankly, even if they had pulled the Haiti trick and just put a large butt robot girl from a third person perspective as the main protagonist in Rydo, that would have spiced up the visuals quite a bit. The game looks nice in that it is asset flipping, nice looking walls and nice looking trees from the Unity store, but that's about it. Like, there's probably less than 30 assets in the whole game just being repeated over and over again. It's extremely minimal, which might help the puzzle solving issue, but it doesn't help that much because there are major visual issues in Rethink when you get down into the dirty details, in that the game probably should be a little bit darker, and the lighting is fairly inconsistent. You can look up at some higher corners of the ceiling and the shadowing makes it fairly dark. Fortunately, there's really no reason why you're ever supposed to look up in the game. You're always just looking down on the ground, which that is also makes it a lot uglier. When you do look up, you occasionally see a nice looking skybox with some buildings and flying cars, so you are in this like futuristic world. But I would argue, since you're always looking down, it would almost make more sense if there were some see-through tiles in the floor and you were above in the clouds looking down at skyscrapers, so you were in like some kind of flying prison. Yeah, I don't think there's a good reason to not just take out these characters. Pincher monster and you control battles an opponent. After damage, you can destroy those monsters. So I'd say no, because I would destroy my monster. And why would I want to destroy my monster? Do I want to add more cards to my hand? Or do I want to do this? Start with this. Everything just kind of changes when you're doing Pendulum, because there's just these face-up Pendulum cards. Monsters. It's weird, you're bringing a card out of the graveyard in this case, but then it can't be used as fusion material. But fusion doesn't really matter because you can still link summon, obviously. So I could bring out something way stronger. But I don't think I want to. I think this is the best setup. Yep. So yeah, so far I'm doing fine with Rethink, but I also have a lot of thoughts here. I've only bought Rethink 1. If I enjoy the game well enough, I mean, I'm not gonna love it. The puzzles are just a little too under-tested for that, and it just doesn't have GLaDOS and Valve funding the development and polishing the development. But yeah, if I like it enough, then I basically need to buy Rethink Evolved. The Steam Summer Game Fest I've been thinking about is like, in particular, I need to pull the trigger and just continue to buy games to keep my library somewhat fresh. I'm falling further and further behind, but I also think I might want to pull the trigger and just buy a Steam Deck OLED. So I would hope that there might be some small discount there. I don't mind getting a refurbished OLED, but I do want to get an OLED version. So, and they don't really have any refurbished OLEDs available for sale at all. I don't think. I think they're just selling refurbished non-OLED versions. And they don't really have any of those either. I think what they've done is pretty much just given them all to GameStop. And then, if any are available at all, it is being sold individually in local GameStop, so your mileage would vary widely. Now, one thing I noticed is that on your library of Steam, it will highlight the game in the case of Rethink. Let's see, where is it? Here. And say controller not supported, which that is a major problem with Rethink, is that it doesn't support controllers, and so you are WASDing and using a mouse and keyboard. But when you go to the store page, it's not in the places you would want it to see. There's no real warning anywhere that says doesn't have controller support. It's just missing the label that would normally be here for controller support. Yeah, here you can see Rethink's description for a Steam Greenlight game is extremely short with 2 sentences. So you really have to bend over backwards to give this game a chance. Fortunately, people did give it a chance. I will also say, though, that this video, so far, there are major parts of this video that I have not seen. So, either I'm early in the game, or this video might be showing content from either Rethink Evolved or Rethink 2. But yeah. Here you have Rethink Evolved 5. Here you have a Rethink Lite, which, yeah, that's crazy. And then you have Rethink 4, Rethink Evolved 4, and it definitely seems like it just kind of goes back and forth between Rethink Evolved. Okay. We'll see what happens here. And may be in trouble. We've got 2200. So the safe move here would actually be to put this in face-up defense mode. Just end the turn. Inherently, though, a game like Rethink really would be very nicely played on the Steam Deck. But if you're having to either go through a special setup, some of this video is straight up just showing solutions to puzzles I've already done. If you're having to go through a special setup through the Steam Deck that's unique to the Steam Deck to effectively just run a program like Joy2Key that would map keyboard input on the Steam Deck to the joystick, that work is not directly being connected to other PC games. And clearly the solution here is, while in the past people have just used Joy2Key, that has just been the universal solution to this, and it's worked perfectly fine. There are other controller to keyboard mappers but Joy-2 is simple and cheap and small in size and free to use. But the next step certainly would be that Steam Client as an application should just act as Joy-2 and have the same profiles for the Steam Deck automatically. And yeah, it probably should be a little bit better than that even. Notice the video there there's a real floatiness when you jump too with momentum. You basically glide down to the ground. But yeah, there's a increased demand you're almost certainly going to want to have with the Steam Deck for continued and increased support. And you just won't have that as we start to like try and play older and older games, which arguably I would say half of all games are either mouse alone or mouse and keyboard centric in their inputs. And certainly that explains why the Steam in Valve are so focused on making the Steam Deck to have the dual touchpads, and so that they can pop up a virtual keyboard and that you can have one act as a mouse. But almost certainly there is room for another solution, a better solution. Yu-Gi-Oh! Still being very slow in these games. The best move here, by far, would be to just surrender. Have we played enough to surrender and not be penalized with it, though? I mean, I would think we have. Like, if we look at every possible metric, we've spent half our time, we've lost half of our life, the opponent has lost half of our life. If any of those would be metrics to not penalize you for surrendering, we would have hit that. But I guess I am also just going to lose, so let's not risk it. I do need to do some experiments. Speaking of experiments, I subscribed to a couple of Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers, and yeah, they are talking about an expansion. I think it's called Fire Kings. I heavily suspect Fire Kings is not in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. I would heavily suspect Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is at least 6 months, if not a year or two, behind in expansions compared to the original card game in Japan, which is probably at least 3 months behind the trading card game in the West. But it does at least confirm one question, that by watching the YouTuber, that Yu-Gi-Oh! Original card game still exists and still is being releasing new content. Let's see. Censored Gaming has put out a couple of videos. There's this Apollo Justice trilogy has been rated, despite the fact that it includes Duel Destinies, which was previously rated M. The reason assumed as to why it was rated M and Duel Destinies was rated M is that there's one story involving Bonzo with including a child, and that was too much, I think, for the ESRB in the past, and the ESRB has since, I think, loosened its regulations. I still feel like it is very much a case that we have to see some potential change in momentum as far as whether people continue to care about ESRB ratings now that E3 is dead forever. I just don't see how you maintain the ESRB in its current form, in its current lobbying expenses, without significantly raising the amount of money that is needed to get an ESRB rating, which is going to just increasingly have people publish games on PC on Steam without ESRB ratings, which is going to create a problem for Steam. Meanwhile, I don't think Steam and Valve have really that much of a relationship with the ESRB. Clearly they dealt with them when they released the Orange Box, but that would be pretty much it. We don't really have a great bit of news. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle put out this video, which I think this is just another great example of the face model not looking 100% great on Indiana Jones, in my opinion. And they definitely seem to be going hard in the first person perspective. I will say though, in this section, that the face there is alright. It's just way too smooth here. It's just not enough wrinkles, not enough like 5 o'clock shadow. And the other characters, I'm just not familiar enough as far as the actors to feel an uncanny valley with them. I don't know what you really could do with that, or what Indiana Jones and the Great Circle really has to be as a game. Does it have to just be good enough, or does it have to be amazingly great? Can it tell a story that is just better than the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny, or does it have to be amazingly better than the movies, even Temple of Doom? Or does none of that matter at all because the game might just play very awkwardly, either because of the first person perspective or just because it's going to play possibly like a Wolfenstein remake game? Which even the Wolfenstein remake games are definitely different feeling. You kind of needed to go in that direction. They had already tried everything else with Wolfenstein remakes and reboots. You couldn't just make what effectively would have been a Doom clone to make a new Wolfenstein when they rebooted Wolfenstein for the second time. People forget they had already attempted once to do that. But that's just not really what I'm looking for in an Indiana Jones game. I'm still looking for Indiana Jones and Fate of Atlantis with puzzle solving, and I don't know if anybody else is really looking for that. So I may very well not be the target audience. I'm just gonna summon things and see what happens. Oh, absolutely nothing. These decks feel like they are just too difficult to figure out. It does just seem like really hard to figure out the strategy and play it. The big news for the past couple days is Power World, and it is going to be seemingly the big news, I think, for a very long time. And certainly it seems like mainstream journalism, video game journalism, is desperate for any kind of clicks, so they are going to be talking about Power World way more than I think they need to. Here we have Video Games Chronicle saying Power World is embroiled in AI and Pokemon, quote, plagiarism controversy. Now, plagiarism claims, I think, are completely inaccurate. There's no direct tracing going on, even here in this example. I was defeated. Let's take a little bit of a break from playing. Even here in this example, I mean, this is not plagiarism. A Cheshire Cat smile, for instance, would definitely be public domain from the description in Alice in Wonderland, and I'm sure that's not the first instance of somebody drawing a Cheshire Cat smile like this. A four-legged creature versus a two-legged creature makes a fairly big difference here. Here you have different horns. I assume this is a Pokemon and this is a Power World creature. But yeah, you see this split tail, wide design, you see completely different color palettes, big yellow eyes. I mean, those are all just very generic things. Now, is Power World parroting Pokemon? Is it parroting the animal monster collector genre that is mostly dominated by Pokemon? Sure. But then also Power World, it has guns, and it's much closer to Fortnite and something like Minecraft than it is Pokemon. And I think you might find a lot of people disappointed in that Power World doesn't really have a mode where you are just RPG style fighting Pokemon against other Pokemon and raising Pokemon, or raising pals. There also seems to be way more of a focus on multiplayer, which Pokemon doesn't have. And definitely I've seen people say they don't care if it's plagiarism or not, or if it's a ripoff or not. They want to see Nintendo suffer. And it is very much a case they want to see Nintendo suffer, instead of saying the Pokemon Company or Game Freaks should suffer, which, if we got down into the details, it really is Game Freaks, as the developer of the Pokemon games, that have let down Pokemon fans by making very poor quality games, very buggy games, and just not training a new staff to use new technology and new engines. Now, as far as AI art, we were talking about just in the last stream the case that it's close to half of all game developers are being forced or willingly using AI assisted art generation already. So it is, at this point, somewhat hypocritical to complain about any game using AI art unless you're just going to die on that hill and boycott and complain about all games using AI art, because you pretty much have to assume that every single game coming out now very likely has AI art in it, or AI generated something. And certainly the rapidness of these kinds of stories is being increased just by the massive amount of sales. They are, I believe, over 4 million sales now in Power World, whereas the last Pokemon game, I think maybe in its lifetime, between the two different versions of Pokemon, was 22 million. So if we see this trend continue and you get over 22 million, if they got way over 22 million, that certainly should teach Nintendo a lesson to bring their games to PC, which certainly those sales were Nintendo's to lose had they even tried to bring some of their remakes of old games or just ports of old Pokemon games to PC. That would have worked. And certainly, even if Nintendo wasn't going to bring all of their games to PC, role-playing games, long-running role-playing games you're going to spend 200 hours in, make a great argument to be on PC, because PC and RPG have gone hand in hand for a long time. Yeah. Eventually, I imagine we'll see people trying to get clicks, and they'll get more into the details and actually play the game and actually review it for its own quality, which I could imagine it's not 100% perfect out of the gate, but the actual player base is also not complaining about this and trying to make clickbait articles. They're just playing Palworld. Here we have Komatsu showing the Palworld early access sales top 2 million. There is certainly room for complaints here that it is an early access game being released once again. Libretto, not talking about Palworld for a second, don't worry, we'll get back to it, has a new Melon DS core version of Melon DS, which I assume is a Nintendo DS emulator. Here we have Gematsu updating its articles, 4 million sales in only about 3 days. So yeah, clearly the demand was high for Palworld. Particularly, they succeeded very well by not having, not spending a ton of advertisement. Yeah. And I can definitely see a bunch of like edgelord 13 or 14-year-olds who have grown up playing Pokemon games going, hey, I also like Fortnite and I like guns, so let's play Palworld instead. But even looking at the screenshot, it does come off more like a tower defense game or a Monster Hunter game than a Pokemon game. It would be devastating to the consumer and creative freedom of people in general to allow a copyright system to let Nintendo try and make a claim that they own generically every single kind of fictional character you might make up or imagine. And inherently, there is just a problem where drawings of creatures probably shouldn't be copyrighted at all. It should come down to, you can draw a mouse that looks like Mickey Mouse as long as you don't call him Mickey Mouse. And the copyright system should say, we're not going to protect drawings of a mouse. Or we're not going to protect animations or 3D models in general of things based off of, even extremely loosely based off real-world sheep, for instance, or things that are just animated in general. The copyright system has always been this undefined percentages argument, where it says you have to use a significant percentage, or you have to be significantly similar to another image, which just doesn't mean anything at all. And there's definitely, I think, room for a better definition in modern times to say the totality of the picture has to be ripped off, or the totality of the 3D model has to be ripped off. If you were going to claim that they were ripping off Pikachu, for instance, a field mouse would not be a ripoff of Pikachu. A yellow field mouse without a lightning bolt tail would not be a ripoff of Pikachu. A yellow field mouse with a lightning bolt tail but then no brown patch in the front probably would be a ripoff, in my opinion. But yeah, it just gets into the messy middle ground. But yeah, I imagine a lot of kids are playing Palworld. But I will also say, while we have a massive 24-hour peak of 1.5 million people playing in 24-hour period, I could also see this being a flash in the pan. But probably not, because there's no other game to really move to. So I think we will be talking about Palworld. I think my initial instinct will be to try and put the brakes on talking about Palworld too much, because yeah, I just don't want to ramble on about it or just over advertise the game. So we'll definitely strive to talk about legitimate news while avoiding clickbait articles that don't really mean anything. Copyright claims, AI art complaints, none of that matters unless there's a actual DMCA that Nintendo tries to file, which so far they haven't done that. Or if they have done it, Steam is not taking down Palworld in response to that. Or if there was a true boycott because of AI art. There's no laws against using AI art other than copyright claims, which if they came back and said that Palworld used AI generated art by feeding in all the 3D models that had been ripped from Pokemon games, which that would change things a little bit if you were directly using those as sources. There's probably some copyright infringement in that case, and so far the courts have agreed that AI art generation is not legal as far as copyright is concerned. It is not non-infringing, perhaps is a better phrase to use, if you're training your AI generated model on copyrighted material. But then that does just go back to the basic argument as far as how much should be copyrightable. We've had this problem in the past, and it hasn't been resolved, I think, completely, in that if you try to make a gun that looks like a certain model of guns, there have been gun manufacturers that have claimed copyright on the 3D modeling of guns, which you would think guns as a tool or a weapon of war at least would be so generic that they should not be given the privilege of copyright infringement protection, particularly since there might be some safety issues in having promotional material or safety material that shows off the depiction of a gun. We've had this issue with cars, and the fight has been mostly given up as far as making models of cars in racing games, where they are just paying the racing car companies for the rights to the 3D models of cars, which I would argue that the generic shapes of cars too is really not a creative work. It's not an output when you make the outside of a car as just for creativity. You make the outside of a car for functionality and wind flow. And yes, there is a small amount of effort to make cars look good looking sometimes, but I don't think that deserves copyright. Inherently, once you start thinking about what deserves copyright protection and what doesn't, it is, in my perspective, just this ever-increasing slippery slope in which you eventually realize that very little deserves copyright protection. We are so far away from the idea of somebody wrote a 1,000-page novel and then they needed copyright protection to prevent somebody else from literally taking word for word that 1,000-page novel and reprinting the book and making all the profits from the sales of that book while giving nothing to the original author. Clearly that is copyright infringement, and that's what copyright protection was supposed to protect people from. But we've gone from 1,000 pages with possibly 300 words on each page being considered in totality something that could be copyrighted, down to very minimal things being considered copyrightable by people's scales. One model may have 1,000 lines of code in it, or 1,000 vertices in which it makes a 3D mesh of the object, but those numbers don't really mean anything as far as the complexity versus the artistic creation. 1,000 words in a novel is the effort of a human creating something creative. 1,000 vertexes in a 3D model is often just automatically generated via software and has no artistic value. Five-minute songs probably should be copyrighted. 1-minute songs probably should have a little less copyright protection as far as the audio format goes. A total painting like the Mona Lisa probably in its heyday when it was first released should have been copyrighted. Drawing a generic painting of a lady probably shouldn't be. So what a copyright really protects has probably been expanded far too much also, in that if the generic description of a Pikachu happens to overlap the generic description of a Palworld character, that shouldn't constitute copyright infringement. It should be really only copyright infringement if we saw a Pikachu here in Palworld, which we don't. In fact, I would struggle to even name what Pokemon these characters are somewhat closely related to. I've seen a Pokemon that looks a little bit like this, certainly, but I've seen a Pokemon that looks a little bit like this, but I couldn't really name it. This is your giant Pikachu character that is, but he looks more like a Raichu character than anything. Anyways, I guess that's probably more than enough to talk about as far as copyright. Video Games Chronicle says a Lego Zelda Great Deku Tree will be released in 2024. It's been claimed the set would be the first to feature the Nintendo minifigs in general, because up until this point all the Nintendo sets have had the blockhead characters instead. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're fully abandoning the blockhead style at Lego, since that looked awful and didn't make a lot of sense. There have been some Nintendo sets that have had micro versions of characters where you're building them with tiny 1x1 studs to represent Mario. There's also been big sets where you have a giant Bowser, which didn't include any minifigs, and it's frankly a little weird that it didn't include some minifigs with the giant Bowser set. I don't know if the Great Deku Tree will look particularly good in Lego, and we had already known that a Zelda Lego set was likely to happen. Yeah, I would want to see something around Ocarina of Time, but my first thought by far would have been to have a Master Sword and a Hyrule Shield combination to go on the shelf for Zelda. If they're doing the Great Deku Tree, that probably means they are focusing heavily on a playset, which probably means that the Great Deku Tree is going to open up and split in half at some point, and you'll be inside the tree, and it probably will take some creative liberty having several rooms and chambers where you will emulate the experience of that first tutorial level of the Great Deku Tree in the Ocarina of Time. Link at that point basically only had the slingshot. I'm not sure he even really had a sword and shield he could use. It would have been a really small, weak sword and shield. It's probably worth pointing out also in Ocarina of Time that Link starts off in this elf forest, but he actually is a Hyrule human, and he was just kind of abandoned as a child in the forest. They don't emphasize that as much in the story, I think, or it's easy to forget. It's real easy to forget that first child section of Ocarina of Time, which actually takes quite a bit of time. Anyways, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, just with the small rumor we have here, if the Great Deku Tree is arguably going to be very big as a playset and a little ugly on the outside, and it's mostly going to be focused on the inside. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually isn't round all the way around, and there is actually just a front face that looks like the tree, and then an open back face for a playset. I never got into minifig collecting with Lego, and frankly I'm so far behind in doing Lego sets and all that I'm just kind of falling out of favor of it. If I was into Lego minifig collecting, Nintendo minifigs might be the next big thing. This might also be an indication that the amiibo concept is going away. I wouldn't be surprised one bit if there is no amiibo support for the next Nintendo console at all, in favor of, well, that is an interesting question actually, come to think of it, whether they would put a camera on the next Nintendo console at all. If they put a camera on it, then object identification of minifigs or amiibos would make a lot of sense, but if they put a camera on it, there's going to be some overly concerned people. They better put a slider, if not a lock, on the camera. Honestly, what they should do is have a screwed attachment point with a camera module, and it would just be some kind of like USB-C plugs in. You plug in a camera module, or you take it out of camera module as an option. But I imagine most parents would be okay if you just software disabled cameras, assuming it actually was software disabled. I could see a lot of people wanting hardware disable. Yeah, and I don't think there's a microphone on the Nintendo Switch at the moment either, but those would be basic things you would think about having. Steam Deck also, though, I don't think it has a microphone. I don't think it has a camera. So you could do without that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo abandons the amiibos. There have been Animal Crossing Lego sets, so wouldn't those technically be Nintendo minifigs? Anyways, these are rumors at this point. I also saw some Japanese person saying they wanted to make a game that was very much like Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which is a very old and very odd choice of a game to try and remake or make something like, considering how terribly received it was. By far, even to this day, I think Zelda 2 would be the game least likely to be well received by new and old Zelda fans. So, yeah. I think we are increasingly seeing some very old people that are working in video game companies, particularly in Japan, who have nostalgia for very old games and are increasingly becoming out of touch with what the modern audience wants. Let's see. Here's that story in a nutshell. The Prince of Persia The Lost Crown senior designer, quote, would love to make a Zelda game. Remy Boutin, not a Japanese game developer, a French guy, I think, said he'd be interested in a Zelda 2 spin-off. Now, weirdly, I think this is promotional art for Zelda 2. This is not what Zelda 2 looks like. And it's a weird statement considering how artistically odd even The Lost Crown is. So it seems like they are just pushing the limits of trying different art styles. Like Zelda 2, they're pointing out, was almost entirely a 2D side-scrolling perspective, and that arguably wasn't its main problems. Its main problems is that you would have a top-down, more RPG field experience where you walk around, and after a certain number of steps, it wasn't even really random. You would run into a party of bad guys and you would have to fight them or try and run away in a very RPG 2D style. You'd get into villages, and the villages were confusing and nothing was visually interesting. And when you would get into dungeons, the fighting mechanic as a 2D mechanic was clunky and awkward. The first Zelda game plays much more smoother. It is from a top-down perspective instead of a 2D side perspective. And yeah. One thing I will also say is that I watched a speedrun of Tears of the Kingdom, and in the speedrun I did notice that you used a bomb in one place to blow up a crack in the wall to get a new collectible, which is something that I just don't think I did even once in Breath of the Wild. And that was yet another just like iconic thing of Zelda games that I did not experience in my playing halfway through Breath of the Wild. That being said, in the speedrun, skipping around, watching only a little bit of it, it still feels like there is still more of a hint in Tears of the Kingdom of having some medium-sized temples versus having a full-on temple that would have enemies in it in multiple rooms. And yeah, while I do think I probably would enjoy playing Tears of the Kingdom more than I did Breath of the Wild, it still would probably be my second favorite game in the Zelda series so far. Although I'd have to kind of consider where I would put Skyward Sword in that mix also. It is worth mentioning, going back to Rethink, one of its advantages that I think is really interesting, but probably just makes it more complicated to design, is that in Rethink you are just in this building that completely connects. And that is an interesting idea compared to Portal, where you get on a elevator, and then the elevator is hiding a load section, but it is also clearly separating one puzzle room from another. Just walking through a hallway or a couple of doors to go to the next puzzle makes the whole facility feel much more connected. But I would argue in many cases it's too connected, and the hallways probably should be longer, and they would give opportunity for some kind of storytelling in Rethink if the hallways were longer, if there was even just a double set of doors, so it was like a containment chamber where one door locked behind you when you unlock the other. Even if there really isn't just any loading happening there. Clearly, Rethink has the advantage of having much larger rooms, which is an interesting thought on the face of it, but it plays very poorly once you can no longer even see the laser transmitters you're supposed to be manipulating from across the room because they're so small. Of course, I am also playing the game from 8 feet away. But yeah, it's another thing that feels like in playtesting, Portal and Valve developers, the developers of Portal at Valve, probably tested bigger rooms and decided not to go in that route to make it a better cinematic experience while you're playing versus a wandering around trying to find the next object to interact with type game. Which, yeah, speaking of games where you wander around trying to find the next thing to interact with, Zelda 2 would be very guilty of that also. Let's see, GameDeveloper.com says that CD Projekt is aiming to begin Witcher 4 production by mid-2024. After going through Cyberpunk 2077's rough patch, CD Projekt hopes to avoid its development troubles with the new Witcher, although questionably, why aren't they working on it now? Like, they've been talking about it, so the second you start talking about a game, it feels like somebody should be working on it, even if it is just one concept artist drawing concept, or one director generally working on a concept, or a writer generally writing the story. There's easily a team of 3 to 5 people that could have been told, at least as a side job, you should be working on this, and this would be the beginning of production. The problem in game development very often is that people claim they're in pre-production, which means nothing at all. How can you be pre-production on something? Either you had the idea and you started working on it and thinking about it, or you haven't had the idea at all. But yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of nonsense in how they label things to try and make it seem like it doesn't take 4 to 6 years to make a game, which I would target 2030 for Witcher 4, unless they just rush it, which then 2026 would be about the earliest I would expect a Witcher 4. I would potentially think they might want to remake Witcher 1 and 2 also at some point, but they're not talking about that yet. But those definitely could be filler games, but they would also push you back to playing stories of a Geralt of Rivia that was less likable. Like, Geralt of Rivia was kind of a jerk in 1 and 2. They make him much more likable in Witcher 3. And then they have to start over with a whole new character in Witcher 4, I'm pretty sure. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Suicide Squad's free post-launch DLC will include the Joker as a playable character. It is kind of interesting as far as which Joker and how they wanted to animate a Joker. Although, it also kind of feels like they could have just taken the 3D model of the Joker that they had from the Batman Arkham series and just copy and pasted it over. Um, there's something weird that he has one eye going to the side and one eye pointing forward here. But yeah, when you're promising the Joker and your game isn't already out, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence as far as the other characters that are the default characters in Suicide Squad. The IGDA retweeted this Interactive Arts Alberta Mentor Cafe that they're trying to have as far as mentorships and game developers mentoring each other. There's perhaps a little bit of weirdness on the concept of mentorships. On one end, it is probably helpful. Like, the idea of having a mentor in general could be helpful, assuming anybody knows anything more than a brand new person who's just new to an industry or field, which in most cases, I'm not sure if game developers really do know anything, or if anything they know is really that applicable, because the way you might develop a game at, say, BioWare might be completely different than the way they develop at Valve, and it really should be more on the training side, that you would learn how things were expected to be done at any specific job, which then would just boil mentorships down to, here's how you get in contact with people, here's how you fill out applications to get that initial job. There is definitely a danger, though, in mentorships being another way in which you create this too closed of a community, too tightly knit of a community, where you're picking winners and losers. I could easily see a mentorship being a thing where you go out and have drinks with somebody, and in those meetings you talk politics, you talk the way people think, whether you're liberal, whether you're conservative, and I wouldn't be surprised if a mentorship is way more successful for people who agree with the mentor's politics and are more liberal generally anyways. So yeah, I could see there being a way of eliminating what SJWs would consider the wrong people and pushing SJW mentality, which we see a major problem with that in the past as far as video games, that where it is this groupthink on many different subjects, and that groupthink often is nowhere in line with what your average gamer is thinking, which for the most part your average gamer doesn't care about any of those topics and just wants to play video games. And in that way, I think mentorships are not ever possibly going to be fair. For the most part, even in the video game community, I'd say if you're seeking out a mentor, you're probably just a weak-willed sheep of a person and should stop being such a sheep of a person. Yeah, I can't imagine it really is going to help you that much. And yeah, I suppose maybe if you were the mentor if you chose somebody who was successful and capable of hiring you, you could have that mentor role to use that to get a job. But yeah, I bet that doesn't really happen that often. By far, I would say, if you want to get into game development, don't waste your time on mentorships as much as spend your time filling out applications and getting education. I hate to sing any praises to a college degree, but having certificates or having programs that you've programmed, you're probably better off having a portfolio of small demo games that you've already programmed, showing that off. So if it came down to spending an hour a week like talking to a mentor versus spending an extra hour developing a game, you probably are better off spending an extra hour developing a game and building a portfolio. So I saw two YouTubers, two Twitter people, saying this Happy Community Manager Appreciation Day, which is, I imagine, a made-up holiday, but noticeably also the community manager would be the person posting this post, so they're effectively just patting themselves on the back. In particular, it's almost impossible to know if anybody is doing a good job as a community manager or not. Well, at least if they're doing a good job. It's pretty easy to know if they're doing a terrible job. We've seen plenty of Twitters that where the person in charge has either gotten the account hacked or gone off the deep end and posted something highly inappropriate and caused controversy. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says fixes are on the way for major Palworld bugs, including the lost save data. The development team is aware of serious bugs that are occurring. So, yeah, the game seems like it really is in early access, perhaps to a level of early access that shouldn't really be allowed. I also saw a YouTube video, speaking of bugs, that at one point somebody set up a situation where Steam tried to uninstall itself and instead it formatted the entire hard drive of the person. But I'm pretty sure the way they did it was by putting the Steam folder in a weird way with a symlink in the wrong place. So it definitely feels like somebody did that to themselves, whether they meant to or not. Notably, the Steam OS being immutable, it would be much more difficult for a Steam OS update to format all of Steam OS. We have a GameDeveloper.com article here that says the Elix developer Piranha Bytes is reportedly in danger of shutting down. Despite the threat of closing down, Piranha Bytes says it's confident it will go on and find a new partner to work with. Inherently, isn't this the problem with almost every company? Maybe they're saying it out loud, but there's been so many companies that have had to lay off people or chosen to lay off people. It was only a matter of time before we start to have entire companies shutting down also. So, yeah, but this is only really a threat of shutting down, which generally if you're shutting down, you don't come out and say there's a threat of shutting down. You just surprisingly shut down one day. The Ace Attorney series will never end, according to the producer. Remasters of Ace Attorney 4 through 6 are being released this week. Obviously, this is the right silly response to give in any question. There's really no reason why any series should say it needs a definitive end unless you're really diving deep into a artistic story that would be better if it did have a conclusive ending. But even at that, if there is a successful artistic story, then there's just people who want to remake it or continue it anyways, or make prequels. Like the Harry Potter series, I guess, technically ended, but there's plenty of Harry Potter spin-off games and Harry Potter prequel movies and books, and there's already talk of remaking the Harry Potter movie series again. It does, for the Ace Attorney series, get a little silly. So here you have the attorney in a suit, a detective in a suit or a coat, and then you have a lady medium with a much more traditional Japanese dress, and a little girl medium which has a different color hair, so I imagine she is a different character. And then we also know that there's another series that's very similar to the Ace Attorney series. That is also being produced still, I think. I can't remember the name of it though. This is probably the first time we've seen this story from Video Games Chronicle. Monster Hunter Rise is no longer working with the Steam Deck after Capcom has updated it with new DRM. Capcom has acknowledged the issue and is currently investigating, quote, currently investigating it. It was very underreported that they have added extra DRM to some of their games. In particular, it seems like the game previously used de novo, and they have now removed de novo in favor of Enigma Protector DRM, which doesn't seem like it's compatible, at least. Let's see. It would be nice here if there was a list as far as what other games Capcom has snuck DRM in, what older games they've added it to, but Video Games Chronicle's not telling me this. I see Brilliant Silvers on the chat saying Ace Attorney is only a game, question mark. Well, Ace Attorney is a courtroom drama visual novel series of games, kind of puzzle dialogue path games, as I understand it. I haven't actually played them, and there's at least 6 of them in the Ace Attorney series. It has been released as Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney in the West. I'm pretty sure there's at least a short run Ace Attorney anime that was made. There's a decent chance that some kind of Ace Attorney cross-promotional manga or comic book or magazine was made at some point. So I wouldn't say it's only a game. It's at least a series of 6 games. And yeah, it's popular enough. It probably struggles a little bit to be sold in the West because it's a large amount of dialogue and visual novel elements or feel will not appeal to Western people quite as much. But yeah, it's gotten a decent amount of support, and it's gotten a lot of sequels, and I would say it is a like B game, not a triple A game by any means, or maybe you would call it a double A game, or even a single A game. B is probably unkind and not really how they refer to games. But yeah, lower budget type game. Something that would have been really popular in the days of the Nintendo DS, where it first launched, and the Nintendo DS had a lot of games like that where you could mobily play something that was a little bit more simplistic, but also took a decent amount of time while the Japanese people were on the trains commuting to and from work. Clearly the Steam Deck now is bringing and renewing that functionality for a lot of games, where it makes a lot of sense to have a Steam Deck and try and play some kind of visual novel or an Ace Attorney game, something like that, while commuting. Depending on how much of a commute you have, people in the West, people in the United States in particular, may not have much of a commute. So Steam Deck doesn't have that extra value. I did do a little bit of research as far as extra value on the Steam Deck, since it can also be a Linux desktop, as far as could you really easily use it to read comic books, and I didn't really see a lot. There was this application called Tachiyomi, not to be confused with the Tachikomi of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, but Tachiyomi was a comic book client that would connect via extensions to a lot of like pirate websites, and so there was just kind of a high amount of capability in which you could just pirate manga and comic books with Tachiyomi, and eventually a Japanese media company threatened to sue the creators of Tachiyomi, so they supposedly gave up on the project, but then immediately at least 2 other applications came about that look exactly the same as Tachiyomi and have the exact same functionality. And there really isn't too many other applications, and most of them are Android applications or maybe iOS applications as far as reading comic books. There really isn't a great comic book manager, which you need a manager. You don't need just a reader. You probably could read a comic book on the Steam Deck as just a zip file containing a bunch of pictures, but if you can't organize, sort, rate a whole bunch of comic books, then it's not really going to have that value. You're also going to have some major problems, I think, in a Steam Deck, in that a tablet would just be thinner. A tablet would have a bigger screen. A tablet would have the lack of buttons and controllers. So it would be kind of a weird experience to rotate the Steam Deck 90 degrees, which is really the portrait orientation you'd want, and have buttons in the way still as you're trying to read a comic book, or even trying to read an ebook, which too, I imagine that would be fairly clunky to use a Steam Deck to do that. But yeah, you would think that that functionality should be thought of, but I don't know how much you can really engage with that. Inherently, particularly in comic book forums, that Marvel, DC, the major Western comic book suppliers have not done anything to have you be able to browse, even on a web browser, a good collection of comic books and do it legitimately and actually pay for the ownership rights of comic books. So even if you made a program, it has to basically be open source, because the people who want a comic book manager aren't going to want to pay for it because they're not paying for the comics in the first place. The best bet still is that the old application Comic Rack, which is now still being remade by fans who assume that the original creator died, and so they are just decompiling and stealing his code for Comic Rack and making a community edition on it. The best bet would be for this new Comic Rack community edition to be modified severely and evolve so that it could run on Linux, which that's going to be a tough order because it's programmed using .NET, and .NET is exclusively Windows based, so that they would have to effectively rewrite the entire code for the Comic Rack desktop app, or they'd have to make a companion app that runs on Linux that connects to Comic Rack's custom server function, which they already have an Android application for Comic Rack that can connect to the desktop server function of the community edition. The better solution, instead of making a custom Linux for the Steam Deck, custom Linux app, or a custom Linux app specifically for the Steam Deck, and we're going to see that separation as far as we see potential apps being added. But Android emulation would be way better if Valve spent the extra effort to just let you sideload any Android app you wanted on the Steam Deck and it was just emulated. That would be great. There aren't millions of great Android applications that are games, but there are are quite a few decent Android applications that would make some sense if there isn't a Linux desktop version, or if there isn't a desktop version. There was many years ago that growing problem where you would have applications for things like Twitter, but then the website for desktop users on Twitter was inferior or non-existent. I still don't know if you can really have an Instagram account without having the app installed on a phone. And on that, as far as talking about the Steam Deck and what can it do other than play video games, I really don't know how well the setup is for setting up a program like Kodi, which would play music and videos and TV things, or if there is more of a background player, music player you can enable while playing video games, or if there is even a decent RSS podcast reader that would work with the Steam Deck so you could listen to podcasts. Yeah, I kind of desperately need to get a Steam Deck myself to play around with it, just to see how many things could I install on a Steam Deck that could take a Steam Deck to being more useful and more playable as a computer instead of just as a Nintendo Switch device. Because one of the biggest problems I have with the Nintendo Switch is that I bought it and I've played maybe 4 or 5 games on it, and that's it. And that's really expensive, frankly, to really have only played 3 or 4 games on this thing on a Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch obviously can't read comics, as far as I know. There's no application for that. Nintendo Switch, I don't think has a music player. I don't think it has a video player. If there are music and video players on the Steam Deck or the Switch, there's a question as far as what network connections can it connect to. Can it get music off my network for using Universal Plug and Play or Windows file sharing, Samba, or FTP? All of those are elements. I'm not making enough progress, I guess. Yeah, as far as the themes go. Win a duel. I've won exactly 0 since this was added. Yep. Anyways, I'm gonna leave the conversation at that and then pause the video and take a little bit of a bathroom break. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So, yeah, there's still like a major problem with me, certainly, is that just stomach troubles, IBS, whatever you want to call it, makes it unlikely that I can consistently even stream for as long as I'd like to stream without taking a break in the middle of breaking up a live stream. One of the things I was talking about on the Steam Deck, as far as like the experiment, as far as can it play podcasts, can it play music, one thought that also needs to be thought about compared to even a tablet or a cell phone is just battery life. Like, there needs to be, theoretically, a way in which you can very low level turn off the monitor, the OLED or the LCD screen on a Steam Deck while playing music or a podcast. Significantly reduce the CPU speed for whatever would save you the most amount of battery, and turn off the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, things like that. Which inherently, if you're going to turn off the Bluetooth, most chips for Bluetooth are connected to the Wi-Fi. So if you turn off the Wi-Fi in one way and truly turn off the chip to use the bare minimum amount of electricity, then you couldn't have Bluetooth headphones and listen to music that way. So you'd have to program it to determine whether you are already connected with Bluetooth headphones. Otherwise, you would turn off both the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth chip at the same time, or you'd have to have separate chips, which they kind of don't make that. So there is definitely a level of low-level programming that you would really want to see Valve engage with to have a long play, because battery life on the Steam Deck isn't amazingly great. If you're adjusting and tweaking things, maybe you can get it to 3 or 4 hours per charge, but you aren't doing 6, 8, 12 hour gaming sessions on the Steam Deck without plugging the device in. And arguably all devices now need to have much easier to replace batteries, to the point where you could just push a button and eject the battery on the Steam Deck and inject a new Steam Deck, which that would be an interesting mod to potentially replace the back plates, pull out the original battery pack, and have instead removable batteries that would let you just swap out and put in a new fresh pair. Although even at that, you would still have to plug in the device via USB-C while you're replacing the batteries, otherwise the whole device would just shut down the second you remove the first set of batteries. But yeah, you do definitely get back to the idea of needing to have swappable batteries if you want to have a long play session. They don't really make devices, even the Switch is not really perfectly designed around an 8-hour car ride or a 6-hour car ride. If you're driving to a different state, if you're going to Disneyland, if you're doing something like that, the only way the Nintendo Switch works is if it's plugged into a charger of some sort in a car. And I assume on planes, you wouldn't get on a 6-hour or 8-hour plane ride without it having some kind of USB charger function where you can plug in your device. So yeah, if you were going to try to add more functionality, I'm kind of rambling here, to the Steam Deck, a low-level power saving mode would make a lot of sense. Even playing movies and TV, you might be able to get the power saving mode a power saving mode out of that, because you might be able to just clock down the CPU and have the GPU just push the video and audio out with less requirements. You might be able to turn off certain cores and just turn it into a one core device, and all of that really needs to be seamless, and that is a problem that Steam Deck has not solved yet. There's a lot of ways you can fiddle, but then there's a lot of ways it feels like you probably need to fiddle if you're thinking about battery life. You probably don't have to fiddle with the Steam Deck much at all if you're just plugging it in all the time. And most people with cell phones have really gotten to that lifestyle where they are just plugging in their cell phones 2 or 3 times a day. But yeah, there is perhaps some hope, but it is almost certainly another decade away that somebody is going to finally figure out how to cheaply and safely and easily make radioactive batteries that would last forever. Although a certain the latest company to claim that they're developing something like that is called the Beta Volt battery, that is supposed to take beta radiation, and I think it's on a graphene or diamond lattice structure. It's going to get power from that. Honestly, if this technology really is capable of working, it probably would happen as far as radioactive batteries in cars, much larger batteries there, so you can make them easier. And then there would almost certainly be a significant change in the price of electric cars, increasing the price to start with, maybe eventually lowering the price of cars if all of a sudden you're not having to make batteries based off of lithium, which there's a huge amount of high demand for that. But yeah, there's a small hope that by this time in 100 years, the concept of having to recharge batteries is out the window. It just doesn't happen. It's not needed. You just buy a device and the battery lasts for 100 years. Of course, that would mean we'd need to start building devices that could actually last 100 years to last the batteries. Otherwise, you're buying a battery and then swapping it between multiple cell phones, which that would be fine too. But let's get back to video game news. Here is the IGDA's retweet for the call for mentors, virtual and in person. I do kind of wonder, had I had a mentor in like high school, what they would have said to me. Although for the most part, I imagine they wouldn't have said anything any other teacher wouldn't have said, which is just the standard default thought is that everybody should have gone to college, and they maybe would have and maybe they would have pointed me to specific colleges, but I'm not sure they would have said anything else. They probably would have just told me that I should also, while going to college, work some part-time job or full-time job and just do everything. And inherently, if I had any mentors in high school from the public school system I was in, it would have been a group of losers who did nothing with their own life. Let's just face it. The vast majority of teachers in schools aren't succeeding in any other industry or succeeding much at all. There are some people that want to be teachers and are good at being teachers, but the vast majority are people who can't get employed anywhere else, mostly because they got teaching certificates or teaching degrees, which is useless anywhere else. GameDeveloper.com here is trying to get more game developers, professionals, to talk about Palworld, which is a great admission just directly to say, hey, we need to talk, we need more articles about Palworld, so let's get as many articles that we can make as humanly possible. Which inherently, game developers should not have the kind of free time to just play some other person's game and drop everything and start playing Palworld. They may play it a little bit, but they, much like mainstream video game journalists, they're more than likely going to play Palworld for an hour or two and then put it away and make a snap judgment. Here we have Alchemy Labs' new COO wanting to find innovative ways to drive VR forward, which is probably the wrong direction to go. I'm just going through my Twitter feed right now just to see if anything new has happened before we start looking at games. It came out on Friday. Today is also the last day for the day before it shuts down. Not that I think anybody liked that game or cared about it. It looked really pretty in the trailers, but that was about it. So, I already, probably somewhat stupidly, decided to go through the games that came out on Friday and try and curate it somewhat, but honestly, I'm not sure I was particularly that effective at curating it. Here we have the Xbox Game Studios games. And honestly, if you had asked me whether Ninja Theory was owned by Xbox, I would have said no. But apparently at some point they did get acquired. So those were all announced. I need to make YouTube shorts based on them. But there's a whole element here in that Petite Game Collection Volume 1 is a spin-off of Needy Streamer Overload, and if you don't catch that, I wouldn't realize why I would put this on the follow list. It does feel like we have hit that point now where somewhere around the 20th of January is when we start to see publishers and game developers really try and put games on Steam, whereas it's been very slow and steadily increasing, but still very slow as far as the number of games in the past since January 1st, and it was frankly a little slow even around December 25th to about January 20th, but now it seems like we are back to having some momentum. Now this is a prologue game, so I'm not gonna make a YouTube short or put it on the follow list because of that reason. Trying to still kind of swear off prologue games. Here we have a game that looks very much like it is a direct parody / ripoff of FTL, which looks good enough for me to give it a chance. Although arguably, if it wasn't in early access, I would just look and see that it already is rated very positive and has 30 reviews and put it on the wish list instead. We have Multi-Turret Academy, which this genre we've seen several times before with 2D anime girls and then a tank game. I think there is probably some appeal for a small niche audience in Japan for these types of games, but I don't think it really translates, and generally just the tank game doesn't catch my attention. So that puts me in a weird position. Should I make a YouTube short around this? I think I'm gonna say no. I already have far too many YouTube shorts. I'll say no also to dogs huddled together, but it is kind of an interesting idea in that you are doing a jigsaw puzzle based on shapes of dogs in a larger silhouette of some dog related image. So it is just dogs on dogs on dogs. But yeah. Increasingly we are getting back to the idea of seeing horror games, and this one's rated very positive, which the amount of horror games is always very high year-round on Steam as far as new releases. This definitely looks like an old school classic RPG game you would play on the NES, or you might play on a very early Apple II type computer, early PC computer, IBM 386. But weirdly, there's no seemingly actual claim that this is an old game being ported, and even if it was, there's just not any relevancy to it. Temple of Aaron may very well have been an old game, but I don't remember it. In fact, I don't remember almost all of these games because I didn't play many of them back in the day, and I don't think too many people played them at all. There was just a very wide split. I mean, it was really a completely different audience between kids who got a Nintendo NES in the 80s and were playing console games, and very well-to-do, probably single white guys who would have had PCs back then. The slightly nerdy, slightly higher chances of playing Dungeons and Dragons players. Just a completely different audience, and that's why you see the Dungeons and Dragons influence in a lot of early PC games, and you just don't see anything like that on NES. The closest you get is some RPG games that go out of their way to not feel like they're doing the Tolkien-esque fantasy Dungeons and Dragons visuals and storytelling. This Turnip Boy series from Guerrilla Games, I believe, is on their third game now, with Turnip Boy robs a bank. Maybe just the second game. The first game was Turnip Boy commits tax evasion. So it's a silly series of titles, to say the least. But yeah, it obviously has some level of fandom. Here we have what looks like a slightly more polished horror game, but it's already being mixed in its reviews. So probably I'm going to have to say no to this. I imagine this is a game that heavily focuses on having online co-op, but noticeably the all-time peak of people who have played the game is 16. So there's either a major bugginess to it or just a major lack of interest. But the visuals, the screenshots, look interesting. We could scroll down here and try and see what the reviews say. Game is totally broken. You can't use the knife to kill anyone, as the mechanics suck and you miss every stab attempt no matter how close you are to another person. Game crashes repeatedly and the developer won't refund your money. I bought this for my niece and nephew as well, so I got screwed over 3 times. Save your money and buy a game the devs who care about the people playing the games they buy from. These people don't. This game is about the grifters, clearly made by grifter developers. Steer clear. Now there's some interesting questions in this negative review as to why is he not getting a refund. Well, he has 3 hours on record, so he's over the 2 hours no questions asked refund review. But yeah, There's also, I suppose, some questions as far as how old was his niece and nephew there that he would have bought this game for them, as one assumes that they're the right age for what looks like an M-rated game. And yeah, this just really highlights a shame that games can look somewhat interesting and you can asset flip a good 3D model, and then there can just be nothing but bugginess and way too much ambition as far as trying to have a multiplayer co-op game, when it would have made more sense to have a single player story based horror game instead. That would have been easier to start with. This looks interesting enough in the visuals for me to give it a chance. Now, what's weird here is this is a math game. You add, multiply, and clone and divide your party members to beat the monsters in your path, which is an interesting thought, super algebral. But weirdly, it's not the only math game that came out on Friday. It's as if math became a big deal. I'm now struggling to move the tabs in the right place because it's jumping up all over the place. So we're going to see another math game as we go through these games. And we're still having this issue where you can have these like good looking horror games and it's just going to come down to like luck whether it's actually good or not. I would lean towards saying no to this game though, normally, because it's not showing you any monsters and there is just a lot of dark empty hallways. But I'm going to be generous and give it a chance anyways. Here we have yet another one of these point and click adventure games that are Spanish only. Unfortunately, there's a whole series of these games that they're releasing on Steam. Unfortunately, there's just no translation in English, so I can't play them. Then Retropolis 2 Never Say Goodbye looks interesting enough. It is a VR game. I really wish like warnings of early access, warnings of VR would be somewhat higher. There's plenty of room up here for no controller support or controller support, VR, early access. Obviously I've zoomed in this page to have this first part take up the entirety of the page. But if I scroll down here, this is visually way worse and you still don't get to the description in many occasions. I would argue the entire Steam store needs a full-on refresh, rethink of how it's laid out, but it would probably be a mistake to change too much. First thing you would do is just get rid of the blue theming, but the second thing you would do is have more collapsible information that would just not need to be shown. I think particularly this box here and sharing and embedding and flagging could definitely be dragged up to this bar. But then also you have leave bugs and feedback and early access, and then the buy it now button should probably be really high at the top. Then the descriptions are collapsed a little bit, but not completely collapsed. And then the system recommendations. I think you could easily collapse the system recommendations. Notice that now they are pointing out that as of January 1st, Steam Deck only supports Windows 10 and later versions. So minimum, here where it says Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 8, the minimum recommendations don't even matter. So there's even more reason to get rid of this text. And these recommended games are always terrible and are just based on terribly self-administered tags to games. But from getting from the review section all the way back up to the top is taking 5 or 6 scrolls of my scroll wheel, when ideally it should take 2 or 3. Am I gonna make a YouTube short for Flumi? No. Yeah, we have another horror game that can look really pretty in the 3D models, but these also just dark hallways. So I think I'm gonna say no to that, which maybe means I should say no to this. Yeah, let's be a little more critical. Here we have a game called Aquascapers, which looks like it's a low effort resource management sandbox game of some sort. Fling to the finish. Looks like it might be an interesting game, but I imagine it's way more interesting if you have people playing and working together. It doesn't feel like it's a game you can play by yourself at all. Flinging yourself in groups of 2, possibly against another group of 2. Now, Bulletstorm VR, I would have sworn that this game came out way earlier than January 18th. So I have to just assume that they have sneakily, in this case, Incuvio and People Can Fly self-publishing Incuvio making the VR version of Bulletstorm. People Can Fly making the non-VR version of Bulletstorm, at least originally. I have to assume that they've just sneakily released this from early access. Obviously, it is not well received at 18%, so I can just take it off the follow list, particularly since it's a VR game and I'm highly unlikely to ever purchase a VR headset. This is probably a little bit of evidence that People Can Fly might be in trouble, like any other any other game. Apparently they added censorship in a game like Bulletstorm, which is notoriously known for having a lot of cursing and profanity in it. So yeah, this person definitely didn't appreciate that. Here we go. Like, it had censored profanity, it has terrible controls, it has botched physics that are worse than the original release, features weapons with a permanently affixed laser pointer, and no recoil, and it crashes constantly. Yeah. So at what level does a company, I suppose, become so desperate that they will just keep a terribly reviewed game, something at 18% on Steam, instead of removing it from Steam? We know Valve is never going to remove a game for being negative. It would have to be, even if it was at 0, it would still need some other reason for it to be removed from Steam. But why let this still be purchased? Why not leave the page up but then remove the sales button, or just remove the page completely? It doesn't reflect well on People Can Fly, which, as a publisher, they only have this one game under their wing as a self-publisher. It doesn't do well for the developer, Incuvio, which only otherwise has Green Hell VR as their option, and that is 71% positive, which isn't super high. when we search People Can Fly, notably here, the game that is hidden more is this Bulletstorm Full Clip Edition that they released earlier via Gearbox Publishing, but even the Full Clip Edition is not, I think, quite as good as the original version, but it may play a little bit better. And then there's the extra cost of the Duke Nukem DLC, which combined now the Duke Nukem DLC is literally 50 cents, but it was much more expensive originally. If we look for developers, as far as People Can Fly, more recently they have Outriders, which is mixed, and a negative World Slayer DLC upgrade. And then they're mostly leaning on very old games like Painkiller, or at least Painkiller Black Edition. Which really, that would be where they should focus their effort, just not have a VR version of Bulletstorm. There is, I think, a level of pride around People Can Fly, around Bulletstorm, and I guess there is some level as far as how Bulletstorm feels somewhat like an interesting Borderlands type game, but the story was so bad and the cussing was so extreme and silly that it turned off a major audience, and it just didn't have enough advertisement, and it didn't have enough funding to write a better story, but it didn't have enough advertisement to promote the game in any way. And so instead it seems like they intentionally did just try to go with a hard R rating effectively in the game, with a lot of silly cursing, which didn't sell enough either. And yeah, so Bulletstorm effectively is how something like Borderlands could go badly, although arguably Borderlands now could go badly just by oversaturation, or just decreasing slightly in quality with every new sequel. I would say that the system is perhaps more combo based as far as the types of weapons and attacks you use, and more score based in how you shoot than Borderlands is, where Borderlands just gives you a bunch of guns that you can use and modify or upgrade or swap out. I don't even know if you can modify guns that much in Borderlands. Yeah, you can a little, but not a ton. It's mostly swapping out for newer weapons. No need really to show off and make a YouTube short on a failed VR version of Bulletstorm. Here we have something called Crumbling, which I'm probably being too generous, but I'll give a chance to. And then here's our second game with math in it. This time it looks like Donkey Kong Jr. with math in it, which ironically I'm pretty sure there was a modded version of Donkey Kong Jr. that had math in it, or if it wasn't a modded version for like PC, then there was some kind of Donkey Kong Jr. math game that Nintendo officially released. That being said, I don't see anything here that would say this is a great looking game or a game worth playing, even if you are trying to teach math. There's a danger in trying to teach math via video games, in that it would just teach the wrong math, or it will teach the style of math that the local schools for your local children don't want to be taught, because there have been some fairly wild changes in math, more than you would assume, as far as just how they teach math. And I think a lot of the ways they teach math are perhaps silly, or perhaps based on an assumption that all math students in elementary school are going to end up being math PhDs, which is a false assumption, I think. I do like the name Monkey Math, but even that might be a little insulting. I could see somebody taking offense by the name. Here we have a game called The Ground Zero, which, again, maybe I'm being too generous, but I'm gonna give it a follow. Then we have a game called Belonging, which looks like it's a mostly walking simulator, but I'll give it a chance. Haikuna, some kind of word search game. Well, it looks really crazy, but you know what I'll do? I'll put this on the follow list, but I'm not going to make a YouTube short on it because the visuals are very rough. Here we have Knights of Greyfang, which looks like a RPG Maker MX game, which inherently the new version of RPG Maker MX does change the visuals enough so these new games don't quite feel like an RPG Maker game, and they definitely feel like they have a higher level of polish to them at first glance. Of course, that may very quickly go out the window if you actually start playing the game, as most of these 16-bit or 8-bit RPG games are just grindy and pointless and waste of time. You draw, I guess. That would be a no. Here we have an action RPG game called Apex Heroines, which is probably nothing, but again, I'll give it a follow. Noticeably, we are increasing in the number of lewd games, or games that feel a little lewd, not labeling themselves with the appropriate warnings and tags. So much so that they should be in the adult section where I wouldn't see them. Clearly, there's an effort here to have these anime girls in skimpy clothing for no good reason. And that probably should be a red flag at some level, because I don't like the mushy middle of a situation like that. If they're going to be characters in skimpy clothing, then I probably just want adult content and some nudity, at least toplessness. If they're in an action RPG and the skimpy clothing is just being added for no reason, then that feels just inappropriate and unhelpful, and it feels like they're just not going to spend that much effort on making the actual gameplay mechanic good, which, looking at this, it definitely feels like this could be a very boring, button mashy, repetitive gameplay. So I'm going to say no to that. And we have a Chinese game that doesn't support English. Nope, I was wrong. It's a Korean game that doesn't support English. A lot of text going on here. Yep. Then we have something that's not visually polished enough to say yes to. Grimm's Gambit. Looks like it might be interesting. We'll give that a chance. Then we have Pal World, which we need to make a YouTube short on, obviously. And then we have Child's Story. And see, this highlights where a great example of where the going through these games and looking at them before streaming didn't really help me any, because I'm still just more awake now and curating more. This Hypnosis card is some kind of card-based lewd game tagged with sexual content and nudity and mature and hentai, not safe for work. And clearly that's all this game is focused around, which is fine in this case, because yeah, if the focuses on this. But then the question does come back as far as why is this not in the adult section? Why does Valve have such a terrible system where the games still show up potentially to underage people on Steam when they should be caught fairly easily? And there should be at least somebody that looks at this and goes, this obviously is targeting a mature audience and should be in the adult section. It looks to me like there's probably an uncensored patch that is in the adult section, but that seems weird if you have a adult section content in DLC. Then that should be a red flag to say the whole game should be in the adult section. Even the mature content here says this game contains violence elements which is not appropriate for all ages. All characters in the game are over 18. Some of the dialogue is sexually suggestive, which, if that is truly the limit of the level of content, and then all the nudity is in the patch, then don't let them use tags like nudity or sexual content. It definitely feels like they just don't know what they're doing at Valve. And it doesn't seem like anybody's in charge, or basic rules can't be agreed upon, which is probably the case, is that basic rules cannot be agreed upon at Valve. I'm going to put this on the follow list since it is being received pretty well, but I don't know what I could really do with that either. I'm not going to make a YouTube short on it, of course. Like, even if the game had millions of positive reviews, I really can't cover it on YouTube, and I don't have extra time to play adult content to be able to just say, yeah, it was a good game or a bad game, which is about as much as YouTube really wants me to say at most, because they don't even want audio descriptions of adult games. Here we have what looks like a dog simulating game, which I've been trying to keep an eye out to see if at some point somebody would make a good dog simulation game. It does seem like some of this, though, is just direct control of the dogs, and the dogs are running through different kinds of obstacle courses and agility courses, which is not really what I would want. I would want more of an artificial intelligence type simulation where you're able to pet and care for a dog, Tamagotchi style. But I guess it is different. There is an argument as far as should I make a YouTube short around Viking Heroes 5. I'll go ahead and do it. Anyways, here we have Bad Santa, which is late to the party, January 19th. As far as if you were trying to make a horror game based on a bad Santa Claus. This almost certainly is an internet meme troll type game though, so I'm going to say no to it. Here we have a Keyboard Maestro Voyage keyboarding musical rhythm game, but it only supports Japanese. I'm a little surprised you can even buy it outside of Japan. You would think that if there was a bunch of Japanese music in the game, they would only give the license to have the music inside in the game be playable inside of Japan itself. I don't know if any of these rhythm games would ever really come back. I think they were a one-time gimmick with Rock Band and Guitar Hero, a two-time gimmick that went for a long time and were fairly successful, but I don't think keyboarding would really do that, and I don't think if you could make a whole new Rock Band game today that people would actually care as much. And if you were going to make a Rock Band game today, it would probably be a cell phone app where you plug in your cell phone to a TV or cast to a TV, and then you just have some kind of Bluetooth guitar toy. We have another horror game called Gnarly Hike, which I guess I have to give it a chance. And yeah, you can pretty much see how there's just way more games here. Wow, this looks like a live action zombie shooter. It's an interesting thought, at least. Probably won't work that well. Arena Renovator has a major update. Here we have Coloring Game Studio, which is just a coloring game from the looks of it. I guess I'll make a YouTube short on that too. Here we have another one of these Spanish point-and-click adventure games. The popularity of things like Baldur's Gate 3 are potentially increasing the number of Dungeons and Dragons assistant apps, not really games on their own, but the visuals tend not to be great on these assistant apps, and that is the case for rolls and dice. And we have a dark comedy visual novel with a interesting giant head chibi art style in the character design, and weirdly very zoomed in pictures of the characters. Looks like you're also potentially playing poker. And then there's using Live 2D. Do we have a video that actually showed off? Live 2D uses a technology to kind of stretch the edges of images, giving it a looping feel instead of being a static image. If your game is using Live 2D, it is a larger amount of effort to design the characters, but it does make them feel much more lifelike. And at a certain level, I kind of question if Live 2D isn't more evolving into just a software, a middleman software that is taking what are roughly static 3D models and then just animating and making 2.5D 3D animations. Like typically this is how you'd see a Live 2D image, is it would kind of just bounce back and forth in a lot of places. A lot of the animation I saw there in that video I wouldn't inherently attribute to Live 2D. I would just call it animation itself. We have another prologue. I'm still trying to swear off prologues. Here we have a game where it's just way too much visual vomit of pink on the screen, pinks and greens. And we can see it's mixed, so I can say no to that. Here we have a game called The Social Engineer, which is VR, but I think I'm going to say no to it. I don't think it has quite enough visual polish to it. Intravenous 2 Mercenaries, I'll give a chance to. Almost done. Ingression, the Portal Trial. Probably should say no, but I'll give it a chance. I'm adding way too many things to the fall list, and I'm not really doing a lot of fall list cleanup. Here we have what is just a hidden object game, but the visuals on it are fairly nice, so it's pretty easy to not recognize that it's a adventure hidden object game. I think it's not 100% just a hidden object game too. Notice that there isn't a single screenshot here where there's a list of words to click on, nor is there a screenshot here where it looks like you are just looking for objects in a pile of objects. If anything, this feels more like a puzzle escape room game. I would be interested in seeing what the reception is for the first game. So let's check that. Very positive on my wish list for Gordian rooms, referencing Gordian knots. The Gordian knot. It's a proper descriptor. Here we have Xenoids, which clearly is an Aliens ripoff game, but it honestly doesn't look too terrible. As another great example though of visuals can be very deceiving. It might play awful. Even the official Aliens games have played pretty terribly. And then Jump Fox would just be a Jump King ripoff, I imagine. So I'm gonna say no to that. Here we have yet another game that feels like it should be in the adult section. Who Do You Want to Date? Professional Girls Collection. And it is just a very simplistic tile-based jigsaw puzzle, I think. It is kind of a different art style too. I don't know if I'd really call it a great art style, or if it isn't just perhaps done on the cheap style of art style. It doesn't look terrible, but it is lacking in some toning and some texturing and details that you might see. Perhaps it's more of a natural color palette, more of a Western style instead of the bright, colorful anime style that you often see. Here we have Kebab Chef's Restaurant Simulator, which noticeably here, I don't feel like it's that different from any other kind of restaurant simulator, other than the focus is on kebabs, which kebabs are just kind of meat on a stick. But sometimes kebabs are shaved off from a spinning metal pole and they make it that way, and sometimes kebabs are stabbed through the middle and then cooked on a grill. Yeah. Much like a restaurant simulator that was only about cooking pizza or making sandwiches, it's fairly limited, and I just don't see a real reason to limit yourself to kebabs, other than there have been so many other restaurant simulators that have already been made, far more than ever actually need to be made. It's not like they're great games that are in high demand. There is this weird split sometimes between what people make and what people want. Here we have a Capital Dilemma game, which feels very much like the Reigns series, but I don't believe it is from the makers of Reigns, and that you're swiping left and swiping right. Now notably, people aren't super happy with the Reigns series. Reigns 3 Kingdoms in particular is the most recent one, so maybe it would make more sense to see if some other company could steal the idea of the interface, which they've pretty much stolen the whole idea. But then in an average Reigns game, you would have money, religion, military power, and king's power, I think was the fourth one. So you're diving deeper into the world of capitalism here, where it seems like it's going to be like money versus labor versus intelligence versus maybe rental property expenses, or maybe corporate power. So really all I think I could do with a game like this is put it on the follow list and see if anybody cares about it. Visually, yeah, I still think I would want to make a YouTube short on it though. So those were all the games that came out on Friday, which, let me just make sure Got everything set up here. That brings us to the concurrent games at a 24-hour peak on Steam, and notably we've had our first change since I've ever started looking in September of last year, with Palworlds taking the #1 spot in concurrent players with 1.5 million players, double the 874% for people playing Counter-Strike 2, and we know pretty much for Counter-Strike 2, Dota, PUBG that there is a ton of bots that knock those numbers way higher, and B, there is just a solid audience of people who just play Counter-Strike 2 every day, all day, and nothing else. They are amongst themselves their own separate class of gamer, very different, I imagine, from your average gamer, in that they probably don't play any other games. Once you get past the top 4 now, you see a significant drop off in the number of players in Apex Legends or Baldur's Gate 3, which is mostly a single player game, and you tend not to see single player focused games make it to the top. It's usually always a multiplayer game where you need 3 or 4 friends who you're encouraging to play also. But yeah, as far as ever since September, I've been keeping my eye on the top 15 or so games, and it really hasn't changed that much on the charts. And definitely it's a case of this is what I've been looking for as far as having a new game, in this case Palworld, come out of the blue as a brand new game being released instead of a game being a sequel or a game just getting an update, and making it in the top charts and showing that the focus has shifted somewhat. Of course, my chart is still fairly broken in that it was programmed to cut off the top numbers, anything above 450,000 players. So in the early access first couple days of launch, Palworld went from 370,000 to 1.5 million, and now it's just off the top of the charts. So we could perhaps speculate that the fairly significant drop in Apex Legends here is in part because of Palworld going up, and the drop of Naraka Blade Point might be, but then you can't really speculate that Baldur's Gate 3 is going up because Palworld is going up. And there are definitely arguments to be made that a majorly successful game like Palworld may just be raising all boats instead of lowering the number of people playing other games. It probably is taking some of the player base from games like Apex Legends, but Apex Legends in particular has just been trending downward for a long time, and overall the number of people playing recently has been trending downward. My chart here has become completely unmanageable, and honestly in a couple more days it's going to start to have to drop off a few dates. It's going to run out of space as it squeezes things together more and more. Ideally, a chart like this would be way more helpful if we saw major ups and downs and we could attribute those major ups and downs to any reason, but we really can't. Yeah. And as far as Steam goes, let's just refresh Steam's front page and see if we even see Palworld getting any special advertisement. We know that a couple days ago when it first came out, there was a full page ad at the top for Palworld, but that is now gone, and apparently a Pirates vs Ninja Fest is happening in a couple days. Seems like the move now is going to be a case where they're going to have these thematic sales, pushing people to buy specific types of games instead of having generic sales where just everything is on sale. which is a smart move, frankly. There's so many games available on Steam. Having different themes go on sale makes sense, and having potentially 2 themes compete allows you to have a sale where anybody who hates pirates still could buy ninja games, or vice versa. The Trine series franchise is on sale. But yeah, even down here, I'm not seeing Power World being advertised. So, yeah. Is there possibly reason to claim that Power World is being hidden? Because I had to click the top sellers to even find it on the front page. Or is this literally just a natural experience of how this should go, where a game comes out on early access in its first release and it gets a little advertisement and then that's it? It would be kind of silly for Valve to advertise Power World for like a full week or a month or longer. And one could very legitimately argue that everybody knows that Power World is out and exists, so advertising it more might not get you that many more sales. Or maybe it is being specifically advertised. Maybe Power World is not being advertised to me specifically because they don't think that that I have any interest in it. Drock 3 here. I can go ahead and put that on the wish list. Yeah. It does kind of feel like Power World should be still mentioned somewhere other than just the top sellers list. But Valve, when advertising other things, really does just show you one instance of the game and then moves on. It doesn't need... It would only get annoying, frankly, if I saw Sea of Stars, then I scrolled down 5 paces and saw Sea of Stars again, then scrolled down 5 paces and saw Sea of Stars again. There's a lot of games here that I'd like to play. A game like Filament here would be a great game to play after playing Rethink and compare a much more newer game. It looks like it's a color-based laser reflecting game, but I think I probably do have several of those already. Alright, so that's going to bring us to the Video Games Chronicle articles. We're already 3 hours in, probably in part because of the bathroom break. So let's see how many of these we've already talked about. We talked about this one. We talked about this one. We talked about this. Although this Video Games Chronicle article has got a different headline. Witcher 4 could enter production this year, and multiplayer is being considered for a Cyberpunk 2, which... Have they officially announced that they were going to make a Cyberpunk 2? I guess they probably needed to. I could see not making a Cyberpunk 2 just because of all the trouble you had with Cyberpunk 1 and just saying, hey, it took us a long time to get it right. Let's surprise release a Cyberpunk 2 if we are going to release a Cyberpunk 2. Or let's just make a different game and not call it Cyberpunk and maybe set it in the same Cyberpunk universe. If they made a different style of game, it might sell a little bit better. Something perhaps even more action based in smaller worlds, less ambitious in general, might be better for Cyberpunk. I can see saying the Cyberpunk series is going to be our small game and then Witcher is going to be our big game. Let's see. Embracer's Gothic and Elix Studios, Piranha Bytes is reportedly facing closure. This would be another Embracer company. The CEO says the studio is in a difficult situation but tells fans not to write it off yet. The fact that they continuously have to reference Elix as the main game Piranha Bytes has made, I think is a red flag too, because I don't think Elix as a game was that well received, and I don't think Elix came out anytime recently. Which maybe makes a great argument to really trying really hard to make your first game you release in a new game company be as high quality as possible, because you're going to have to be associated with that game and that product for potentially the rest of your career. Here we have another plagiarism claims. Palworld Pokemon plagiarism accusations pile up as the CEO responds. Artists accused of copying 3D models. Pocket Pair claims it received death threats and abuse, which inherently, anytime there's any heat falling on any company, they claim that they've received death threats and abuse, which sometimes those death threats are coming from inside the house or faked or non-existent, or a lot of times, most of the times, death threats are coming from crazy people or trolls or people just joking and not to be taken seriously. In the modern world where anybody can say anything, death threats are kind of common. I guess you have to investigate them somewhat, but I wouldn't take them anywhere seriously as people sometimes do. There would be an interesting copyright claim there that would have to go through the courts, I imagine, if they had taken the 3D models from Pokemon games, decompiled it. That would have been illegal, breaking DRM almost certainly. That would have been illegal to get the mesh frames. And I just don't really see a reason why you would do that. Instead of just tracing your own mesh frames and then changing things significant enough so it wouldn't actually just be tracing. Yep. Really what this all leads to is a case where these embedded Twitter tweets are still terrible. Their text is too small. This really is going to come up to a situation where you just are going to have to throw up your hands and wait and see if Game Freak or the Pokemon Company does some kind of DMCA lawsuit, copyright lawsuit against Palworlds. If that lawsuit never happens, then we should just stop talking about plagiarism claims. If Nintendo, Game Freak, Pokemon Company, you've got 3 different businesses there, all very likely to protect their copyrights if they have a claim. If they don't care, then as an end user consumer, I shouldn't care either, and I should just either enjoy Palworld if I want to enjoy it or not. Even here, when the comparison is just not close enough, like, I would immediately dismiss the idea of 4-legged animals and the meshes even being that similar. Like, the ears are different here, the nose, the mouth seems different. I can't even tell about eye placement. The hair seems different. The tail length to tail to chest looks to be fairly close, but then the tail design is different. The fur on the legs here is completely different, and the tail to chest length probably is somebody making this image zooming in one object so it looks the same size as the other object. But yeah, I would argue maybe meshes don't deserve to be copyrighted at all, and only the final product of having a texture over a mesh as a 3D model deserves copyright. That's something the courts would have to decide. But yeah, this really is just something not worth talking about or thinking about until an actual lawsuit happens. Moving on, WWE 2K24 will be released in March, celebrating 40 years of WrestleMania. Inherently, this definitely feels like a case where WWE is still very heavily trying to sell based on nostalgia of previous generations of wrestling. I don't think wrestling nowadays is anywhere as well received, particularly post-pandemic. You also have a situation here where I have Cody Rhodes, I guess is who this is. I don't even recognize him, being the main person for 40 years of WrestleMania, when pretty obviously Hulk Hogan should be the main person for WrestleMania, because Hulk Hogan, I recall, always wrestled at WrestleMania, was always the main bout fighter at WrestleMania. But I don't think WWE has Hulk Hogan's rights. Maybe they do have the Hulk Hogan rights, but then also Hulk Hogan's fairly controversial, so they're not trying to promote him. Let's see. New attires for Macho Man, Macho King Randy Savage, Rey Mysterio, Triple H, Charlotte Flair, Ray Riley. Yeah, but noticeably no mention of Hulk Hogan. And these WrestleMania numbers for years are jumping around quite a bit. Skipping over some other WrestleManias. Let's see, we had already talked about Monster Hunter Rise no longer working on the Steam Deck. And then we had already talked about the Ace Attorney series never ending. And the Prince of Persia Lost Crown senior designer wanting to make a Zelda 2 clone. Spin-off. We talked about the Lego Great Deku Tree rumor. And then we talked about Palworld having more concurrent Steam players than Cyberpunk and Elden Ring, and now they had the most ever. And plagiarism again. 343 says that Halo Infinite is done with seasons as its shift approaches. The problem here is that Halo Infinite has just gone around in circles. They're really just stalling for time as they fail to have any significant single player experience for Halo Infinite or add anything multiplayer wise that people really could get excited on. And I'm not sure that there is much of anything you could add to Halo to make people excited about it before you're just turning it into a Fortnite clone or something, which that would be the right thing to do, is make a spin-off Halo Fortnite clone and see if that works. If you could convince older people to play a Fortnite clone based off Master Chief and Halo, they might decide to leave Fortnite in that case, but the younger kids probably wouldn't. Let's see. Pokemon style survival game hit with 2 million players in 24 hours. Old story at this point. We talked about this previously, that the Xbox servers are weirdly limited to only 2 to 4 players, where Steam players get 32 players. And then we had talked about this before, and that is all the Video Games Chronicle articles. Now we don't really have that many Gematsu articles. Postal Brain Damaged is coming to Switch on February 2nd. This is a remaster of Postal, but in a lot of ways I think it is just yet another effort from the developers and publishers of Postal. Nope, Brain Damaged is not a remake. It's a whole new game that just looks like an old game. It says it's a new action-oriented take on the Running with Scissors cult game series with the throwback graphics and fast-paced modern gameplay. The problem with the Postal series, though, is that Postal 4, I believe, is mixed reviewed in the last 30 days, but 73% overall. And let's see, Postal 3 either is not listed for sale anymore. Postal Redux is very positively reviewed. Do I just somehow own Postal 3? I own Postal 1, which the graphics look very different for the original Postal. But yeah, you have this weirdness where Postal Redux and Postal 2, and then no Postal 3 at all, then Postal 4, then Postal Brain Damage, which notice that the art has drastically changed in Postal Brain Damaged, where before it was very red and bloody. And honestly, looking at the screenshots of the other Postal games, that bloody horror like visuals seems very out of place. Well, with the exception of Postal 3, it seems like there is better reception for the rest of the games than I thought it had, but I don't think it's really a game I'd really ever want to play. It does just feel like it's a product of an earlier time, of an edgelord teenager type game that I just wouldn't probably be in the mood to put up with, and all its kind of ridiculousness. And yeah, there's been a massive increase in at least reporting around school shootings and things like that, and violence and going postal, people going postal in general, that a game like that loses some of the fun once it feels like it really could happen. Brotato is coming to the PS4 and 5 and the Xbox One and Series on January 30th, which is already on Steam and overwhelmingly positive. It's like a top-down twin-stick shooter. Go ahead and put that on the wish list. A platform fighter inspired roguelike game called Spiritfall is going to launch February 28th. Let's see if we've got that on the fall list. Yes, we do. There's a lot of variety in these screenshots, which could definitely lead to some confusion as far as how the game actually plays. But people are liking it in early access so far. Naruto X Boruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections DLC character Hagoromo Otsutsuki is launching January 25th. I have no idea who that character is, but I would assume he's some newer, important character of some sort. Let's see, WWE 2K24 announced for the PS4 and 5, the Xbox One and Series and PC. Yeah. It definitely feels like to me that Cody Rhodes is one of the characters that they tried to make popular and didn't really succeed at making popular. I have no idea who this character is, so I have no idea if this face model is accurate or not, but that seems very rough in the face models compared to, say, this guy. And I've seen this lady, but I couldn't tell you her name. And here you have Hulk Hogan And Andre the Giant, and the 3D models for them look very rough. I have no idea who this lady is. She probably is new. And I guess this is supposed to be a young Undertaker. And that's supposed to be like Bret Hart. And there's Sean, I guess one of the wrestlers being a umpire. This may be the screw job era being depicted, where they stole the title from somebody. And then here we have the Undertaker throwing somebody in a coffin. Which really, at this point, they should just give up on the interactivity and hire a better animation company to make animated remakes of wrestling. Change it up and sometimes have the other person win versus who historically won. And just give up on the gameplay for more of a focus on the better graphics. Although 2K may be set to a nice situation where if they just wait long enough, AI generated faces and of real people that they already have footage of may get so good that 1 year we may see one of these wrestling games jump up to majorly better quality models, just using AI. That all of a sudden these wrestling games will look good, and then it would just be a focus on programming the games to play well. And if they were putting more money into making the games play well, because they had fixed the problem of the ugly graphics and the ugly models and ugly faces of people, then yeah, you could see a major improvement at some point in quality of wrestling games. Although I do question if maybe wrestling games just control poorly always because the concept is confused. I'd also say if you have to lean on video footage or mocap footage or picture footage of wrestlers, a lot of them have tons of scars all over their faces when you get up close, and that could be in part hurting the mocapping and 3D modeling that's happening now. They have tons of scars on their foreheads because they've taken razor blades and cut their foreheads to make themselves bleed on stage. And generally they just get injured for real. I'm sure a lot of them take steroids too, and that, I imagine, changes their appearance. I'll throw that out without any actual claim or evidence. But yeah, I still, even if I could perfect the visuals of all the wrestlers, and I still would struggle to figure out how to make a wrestling game feel fun and control well and play in a fun way. Let's see, Palworld up to 5 million sales with 1.5 million people playing at the same time, which even those numbers I think highlight something. Even in a best case scenario, there's 3 8-hour periods in a 24-hour period. So divide, if all 5 million of these players were playing for 8 hours, divide it by 3 in a 24-hour period to get to close to the amount of concurrent players we had. It's almost exactly the right number. 5 million divided by 3 would be 1.761218. No, 4812. 5. Yeah, it would be almost exactly on the dot. 1.5. I don't know. My brain is drained. And see, I wanted to play more of that puzzle game Rethink today, but honestly, I'm going to have to just take a break. And I'm still trying to figure out what to do after streaming so I'm efficient. Whether I'm making macros automatically or scheduling macros automatically, doing something that I don't have to think about, but would have my computer continue to work while I'm, say, watching some Amazon Prime or streaming show of some sort, or just taking a nap. Moving on, this week's Japanese game releases are Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, Tekken 8, and Shiren the Wanderer 6, and more. There is a very long list here of combined and physical and digital games compared to what we've been seeing in the previous weeks, which definitely makes it seem like Japan either is back to business because they've recovered somewhat from the earthquake they had, or they're just back to business because we are now approaching the end of January. It's still fairly small lists of digital only games. Clearly way more digital only games are coming out. Now we have Apollo Justice Trilogy on Steam, and somehow I missed it completely. There's just no reason why I shouldn't have already put that on the follow list. Let's see if there's anything else here I potentially missed. There's a chance, certainly. Yep. These are games that aren't out yet, so I would have seen them likely, but I'm not going to take that chance. Of the list of physical games, I would have to assume Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth will sell the best, and a lot of people are playing it, although Apollo Justice may sell very well also. Aliens Dark Descent and Agatha Christie, I imagine, won't sell that well. And then Pal World selling 4 million, then 3 million, then 2 million. They literally were just updating it every time it hit 1 million. And I think we'd already talked about this Perry-based hand-drawn Metroidvania game. Let's see if it's on the follow list. Yeah, it is. Now we bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles, which we probably have covered most of these, so we'll be done, I imagine, pretty quickly here. I didn't play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, but I had already played some off-screen, but I still need to try and get some more victories. So yeah, we talked about this. Approximately 1/3 of game developers were affected by layoffs last year, according to the GDC 2024 State of the Game Industry report, which being affected by layoffs could be anything as you didn't get laid off, but somebody in your office got laid off and it affected how you worked, all the way down to you got laid off. There is a question that can almost never be answered as far as, was the game industry 1/3 of its size too big that it needed to really lay off 1/3 of the employees, or are we going to just see a whole bunch of new companies forming and a whole bunch of hiring back of people? Or is it just shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, and maybe they're laying off people from one company and then those people just go and work at a different company? In the past, certainly when I've imagined myself as a boss, being quick to lay off people, fire people, in particular fire people if they're just not a good fit, has felt like a more generous than it sounds way to deal with people. There's a lot of people certainly that are trapped, or at least feel trapped, to stay at a job they hate, and it only makes them more angry and irate and worse workers. Whereas if you if you can just let them leave the company and take some unemployment and find another job that they might like, there's a hope for a better situation for everybody involved, assuming it goes that way. It often may not go that way. It may be that somebody gets fired, they take unemployment, and then they can't find a better job and they get a worse job, or they're completely out of the industry and they're working at a McDonald's flipping burgers when once they were a high-level computer programmer. And yeah, there are perhaps more specialized solutions to investigate before firing somebody. Some things, if for instance you owned a bar and you had somebody stealing tips from another waitress or stealing money out of the till, obviously actual crimes are things where you've just destroyed trust and you have to fire them. It would be so ridiculous to not fire them that it would just encourage other employees to also steal. But also, if somebody's just late, yeah, you try to address that, or you mostly ignore it. If they're late once, you just kind of ignore it. If they're late consistently, maybe you try to adjust the schedules. Ideally, being late shouldn't be that big of a deal, depending on what kind of job you have or what kind of career you're working in. There's a big difference between being 3 minutes late and 3 hours late too. But yeah, once somebody has gotten to the point where they just hate their life, they hate their job, the situation has already gotten too extreme at that point, and really all you can do is fire them. And that's really the only solution there. But that's not what layoffs are in the game industry. It's not that we're having a rash of bad video game employees being fired for cause, or just being fired in general without cause. You're having people being laid off in bulk just because some accountant said they needed to lay off 100 employees, and then you're just picking randomly 100 employees. And yeah, that tends not to really improve morale or fix the situation in the long run. Anyways, I don't want to ramble too much. Alchemy Labs' new CEO wants to find innovative ways to drive VR forward, which he's right at a certain level, I guess, even though I would say just abandon VR at this point. But you would need some kind of innovation in VR to move it forward and have any chance of it being a platform that people want to embrace, which I just don't think people want to embrace VR. Once glasses become super light to the point where you don't even feel them on your face, or we could plug directly into contacts or into people's brains, that probably is when VR might start to work as a concept. But otherwise, I don't think people are going to embrace it. And if they could make holodecks or something, then a holodeck, I guess, technically would be virtual reality also, and that would work fairly well also, but I don't see a way of doing that with our current level of technology. Let's see, Palworld from GameDeveloper.com also getting more articles about it. See, this is weird headline though. It tops 5 million sales after shifting 86,000 copies per hour over the weekend. So they've just gone out of their way to do some weird math that just doesn't mean anything at all, when clearly the headline should just be Palworld tops 5 million sales over the weekend, if you want to include that too. But the extra math, not needed. Lethal Company, in comparison, has been going a little bit longer, and it has an estimated 10 million copies being sold, which I'm pretty sure Palworld will surpass that, unless it's just hit a very early saturation point. And then we talked about this in the previous stream, that Square Enix is at least beginning to signal that they want to make fewer but better games, which is the right direction for Square Enix, but it does potentially imply that they are just going to focus on making a Final Fantasy game and nothing else. And yeah, that's going to be it for this stream. Then, as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Thank you for watching. Have